Okay, so I'm Louise Zimanyi. I'm the director of the Consultative Group on Early Childhood Care and Development. This is Ziba Vaghri, one of my colleagues. What I'll do is I'll give you like a 2-second bio on myself, and then Ziba will introduce herself, and then I will do about 25 minute presentation. Ziba will do a presentation, then we'll have about 25 minutes for questions. But for me, if you have a burning question during my presentation that you want to ask, I mean, feel free to ask it if there's something that you want clarification on. So I've been working with the Consultative Group for about 15 years. My background is in early childhood development, and I've done a lot of work around programming and advocacy and policy all over the world, in Canada as well. The Secretariat for the Consultative Group is based in Toronto, but all our partners in the board are all international. So I have done a lot of work with kids and families from prenatal all the way up to grade 5 and 6. So I'm going to pass it over to Ziba, and you can introduce yourself, and then I'll start.
Hi, I'm Ziba Vaghri. I'm from here, from University of British Columbia. I am the director of International Program of Help, which is an institute nested inside the University of British Columbia. The mandate of our organization is helping children thrive, and the mandate of my program aligned with that is helping children thrive globally. In doing that, we've had lots of projects with different international development agencies, with different universities internationally. And today, following Louise's presentation, I'm going to be introducing one of our largest projects, which has been happening over the last 7 years under the auspices of United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child, and with membership of number of international and national agencies. Thank you for being here.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ziba. Just take this. So I won't go into too many details about the consultative groups. You can go to the website, which is ecdgroup.com. This is a little bit of the visual map of some of our, all of our formal partners that we have formal partnership with, but we have lots of linkages to other organizations and networks doing work around ECD or leveraging work around ECD. The Consultative Group started in 1984. It's 30 years old this year. It started out as a group of funders that were funding early childhood development, the Ford Foundation, Bernard Van Leer Foundation, Aga Khan Foundation, UNICEF, that were doing work in early childhood development globally, and really wanted to get together to discuss what were they doing, what were the trends, what could they leverage better, how could they get expertise and input from the regions to help inform what they should be funding. So they had sort of focal points from the regions, and it was Latin America, Asia, in particular the Philippines. In Latin America it was Colombia, and the Caribbean. Don't think there was an African focal point at the very first meeting. But anyways, it was really to sort of advise and, as a collective, come up with an agenda that might better leverage ECD. And ECD globally, although there was a lot of work being done, it was just at the cusp of interventions and investments. And so that's how the Consultative Group was born, very organically. And the mandate is still the same. It's still really to convene, engage, mobilize ECD actors and others to look at what knowledge do we have about ECD, where are the gaps, what are the trends, how do we communicate what it is we want to advocate for, what are the ways to do that. I mean, when the Consultative Group started, they communicated by fax, and the publication was stapled together and Xeroxed off. It wasn't even Xerox, it was before Xerox. It was, I can't remember the name of it. It was like something that, what was it? Yeah, mimeographs, right? Where you had the carbon paper and you had the machine. That's how they, and all the meetings were face to face. And if you went traveling, you didn't call home. I mean, you didn't just call home. You just traveled, and that was it. So we've come a long way in terms of our communication, but definitely, to what do we know? How do we communicate? How do we support what's going on in the regions? How do we make sure that what's happening in the regions leverages the global work, and the global work is leveraged by what's happening in the regions? And how do you bring people to the table that can move a certain agenda together? So the consultative group is not a huge body. It's not like ACEI or OMEP where it's membership driven and it's like a big organization. It's sort of small group of organizations, 50 to 60 organizations that then act as networks to leverage out the work of the CG. That might change in the next couple of years, but that's sort of the model that it's been. And we have an annual consultation every year that looks at a theme that's not necessarily being addressed. HIV/AIDS in young children, HIV/AIDS in young children, emergencies, climate change. We're looking at one possibly on disabilities this year. Post-2015 has been a huge advocacy focus for us since 2012, where the group of partners decided that we really need to make sure that ECD is on the global agenda for any kind of Millennium Development Goals or Sustainable Development Goals that are developed post-2015. So here a little bit of our mandate, which I just talked about. And ultimately the aim, the age group is 0 to 8, so it includes prenatal to 8, and to advocate specifically for those living in disadvantaged communities, countries globally, especially those in low and middle income countries. So as I said, our advocacy objective over the last few years in particular has been around the post-2015 development agenda, and to ensure that ECCD is positioned, and how do we do that as a global community, knowing that right now there are 200 goals on the table. So how do we ensure that ECD is prominent among the discussion? So if you're not familiar with the 8 Millennium Development Goals, here they are, the 8. And what was interesting, and David Anthony, the UNICEF person, mentioned it in the presentation before, that what was unique about the MDGs was that it brought the global community together to agree on what a global set of goals should be and how to measure them. And of course, the number 8 didn't actually have a target or an indicator for it, but all of the other ones did a way to measure. And that was different than what had happened before 2000, which was, the global community they were all working on their different targets and different priorities, but not as a global collective. The difference between this set of goals and the process that's happening now for post-2015 is that it is the global community. It is not just primarily a group of funders deciding what the global agenda should be. It really is the global community, the countries, and it will be the member states and the countries that decide what a global framework will look like post-2015. So that's a little bit of the difference. And some of the successes, I think, as David Anthony said in his presentation too, everything was fairly on track until about 2008, when the global financial crisis hit. It really did sidetrack some of the progress in terms of moving the MDGs. But there are 500 million fewer people in extreme poverty. So the poverty eradication goal number 1, there was improvement there. Child survival, many more children surviving, many more children getting vaccinated, maternal mortality improved, and then way more children in school. However, if you look at it from the point of ECD, you have many more children. So you have many more children surviving, but all the things that put them at risk for survival put them at risk for delayed development. So you have many more children surviving, but you have many more that don't develop to their potential. And if you look at the 2007-2011 Lancet series on ECD, there are 6 papers. They really articulate what the scope of the problem is globally for ECD, how you can mitigate the negative impact of some of these, of what makes it difficult for children to develop, and what are sort of the next steps in terms of how do we solve some of these issues. So if you haven't had a chance to look at those Lancet papers, they're really quite good. And then you have all these children attending school, but they're not learning. So they get to grade 4 and they're not learning, they're not reading and writing, and they're not even getting the other social skills, all the non-cognitive skills. They're just not, they're graduating, and if they haven't dropped out, in some countries, dropout rate in grade 1 is 50%. If they're not dropping out or repeating, they're not learning. So here, if you're going to achieve the MDGs with equity, what is the role of ECCD, right? So yes, you have all these children surviving, but then you have the issues of what happens with the children who are surviving. The 200 million children under age 5 that don't develop to their potential. And then you have all the numbers of kids that are out of school, and the huge numbers. I was at a meeting last year at the World Bank, and it was the 9 most populous countries, Bangladesh, Haiti, that are, and the kinds of strategies to get those 61 million children out of school. And the World Bank hosted these ministerial meetings, and the World Bank, you know, in the opening statement said that the number 1 strategy to get those children out, the hardest to reach children, was early childhood care and development. Now, why we don't see some of that, why we don't see that reflected on the global agenda, we're not sure, but we see there's been a lot of movement for ECD. I mean, we know way more now than we did in 2000 when the MDGs were created. We know way more about brain science, the economic returns. The best investment is in early childhood. We have the rights work with the convention, and then all the work that Ziba is going to talk about in terms of specifically implementing rights in early childhood. We didn't have all that information before. Plus, we have all the practice, all the research, and it's really a very cross-disciplinary evidence base from psychology, from neuroscience, from economics, and all the work that we have in the regions, that what's happening on the ground. We didn't really have as much of that. A lot of it was going on, but we didn't have it at our fingertips, and now we do. So we have a very good, compelling case. So I just want a couple of things on what's been happening in the last 18 months in terms of the process for post-2015, because it is a moving target, a lot of consultations, I mean, it's been like, and I haven't even, well, I feel like I've been working on it part-time, but it's only like probably 1/4 of my job is post-2015, and I feel like it has been, I just feel like I'm getting up to speed on where we're at now, and because it's been 2 sort of parallel processes. So there's been the UN High-Level Panel of Eminent Persons, convened by Ban Ki-moon, and it was an 18-month sort of global consultation on the 8 areas of the MDGs. Regional, national consultations, events, input into papers, and the whole idea of this 18-month consultation was for this high-level panel to come up with a report to present to Ban Ki-moon on where are the global priorities, what are people saying around where was their progress on the MDGs, and what is the unfinished business, and how do we move forward. They weren't supposed to propose a set of goals, but they did, with targets and some indicators. So there's a whole website on it, on the UN High-Level Panel. And they came out with a report, and if you go to our website, you can see the response that we had to the goals, targets, and indicators. Where was early childhood already talked about, and where could it be better strengthened if we said, well, for example, the UN High-Level Panel advocated for 1 year of pre-primary. We said, well, no, it should actually be 2 years pre-primary, 1 year for everybody, and the second year especially for those that need it the most, because the ones who need it the most are the ones that are least likely to get it. So while the high level, and here you can see who the high-level panel members are. Here we go. All right, so you got the president of Indonesia, you've got Ellen Sirleaf Johnson, huge ECD person, right? President of Liberia, you've got David Cameron, Amina J. Mohammed, she's the special advisor to Ban Ki-moon on post-2015, right? You've got somebody from Cuba, Benin, India. You've got Graça Machel. Who else here? Queen Rani of Jordan. So you got a lot of ECD proponents. We've got, so here, the mayor of Turkey. And Turkey's doing all kinds of work on ECD. So we really felt that there was a lot of leverage here to get ECD in that high-level panel report. And when you read that report, there is nothing about ECD. I mean, pre-primary is there, and stunting is there, but there's nothing about the importance of investing in young children early, child development, brains, anything. There's absolutely nothing in that high-level panel report, which was really unfortunate. We had a national consultation last year in January in Turkey with UNICEF, CG, OMEP, specifically because we knew he could leverage some action around ECD. And we didn't, and Queen Rania, huge ECD work being done in Jordan. So it was really disappointing not to see more in there around the narrative, around the high-level panel. Anyways, that work finished last year in June. The report was issued. We put together a response. A lot of people put together responses. And although that work is done, those are still ambassadors, and those are still representing countries that are part of this open working group process. So then you have this second process. Which essentially should have started around the same time as the UN high-level panel process, but it took them so long to decide which member states were going to be part of this open working group that it started much late, and it came out of the Rio Plus Summit. So tonight at the reception, Severin Suzuki is going to be speaking, and Diane Whitehead was talking about those 5 minutes that stopped the world. Well, it was at the Rio Summit on the environment, on climate change, that she spoke at when she was 12. And what happened with the Rio Summit was that they were really looking at environmental sustainability, climate change. 2 years ago in 2012, they expanded the definition of, it might even been the 11, maybe 12. They really broadened the definition of what they felt was sustainable development. It wasn't just looking at environment, but social development, economic development, and cultural. Social, economic, and cultural. And so therefore, they were looking at a global set of sustainable development goals that were not very dissimilar to what the MDG process was looking at in terms of what could a global, and there was, in 2012 and into 2013, there was not really any kind of clarity around, well, how are these two agendas going to align, or not, and maybe this open working group on sustainable development goals, which are the member states, as the political process, was actually going to be way more influential than a high-level panel of eminent persons, even though it was convened by Ban Ki-moon. Essentially, the two processes have kind of aligned in some ways. Although the report is done by the UN high-level panel, the open working group has not prepared its report yet because they were late in starting. So their report is due in August and will inform the UN General Assembly meeting in September. So this is the website. So everything you wanted to know about the open working group. And as you can see, they've had a series of sessions starting last March. So they've had thematic sessions every month. The member states meet. They decide, is it going to be on food security? Is it going to be on protection, on security? They finished their, and actually you'll see here, the members. These are the members. Let me see if I can do this. So it doesn't represent all the countries. This is why it took them so long, because it's very political design. You can see they're sharing desks, right? So the African, Asia Pacific, Latin America, Western Europe, and Eastern European groups. So you can see, like, for example, when they speak, when they address the open working group, and there are two co-chairs, a Hungarian and a Kenyan co-chair, when they address, they have to agree on the statement that they're going to put forward. So I thought it was very interesting, like, how do you get China under Asia Pacific, right? Number 4, China, Indonesia, and Kazakhstan to agree when the contexts are so incredibly different. Saudi Arabia, Korea, and Bangladesh. I mean, I don't know how they do it, really. Iran and Japan. I mean, you cannot get any more different than that. So now I just saw something yesterday, which is really interesting, that in fact, and Nepal, yes. So you can imagine, right? So what's happened is they had these sessions, the thematic sessions are done, the co-chairs spent, I don't know, 10 days putting together a document that highlighted all the sort of priority focus areas. What was mentioned, what wasn't, what were people saying? And all of this is on there, but if I go back to my, here. These are the areas, the priority areas that the open working group, the co-chairs came up with. And then all those countries that you saw had a chance to put a statement forward on what was missing, what they agreed with, what they didn't like, where the recommendations. And as you can see, and in their statements, only 4 countries mentioned anything about children or ECD. Colombia said, we hope that the goals, that mothers will be able to understand the goals. I think Papua New Guinea, I think, said something about breastfeeding. Somebody else said something. There was really nothing around children, child development. Huge focus on where are youth and women in the agenda, but not so much on children. And I think what the ECD community has been trying to do is to, decide, like, where is the most advantageous position for ECD? Is it as a goal? All children have the best start in life, develop to their potential, and then services and interventions that would support child development and families. Do you do something global like that, or do you look at where are the priority areas? Poverty eradication, promote equality. If you can look at those. ECD is in most of those. Or do you go in there and you say, okay, well, if we know that health is supporting reduction in stunting, how does that move the ECD? If we can see where is the agenda already being addressed, ECD, and where should the ECD community look and see where is there a gap and where do we hang our hat on? And it's been very difficult because the ECD community has been divided on that. And it is not likely to get a goal on ECD when you have 200 goals being debated. There's just no possible way, in particular because you can't measure ECD. You can measure stunting and you can measure pre-primary, although we haven't done such a good job on measuring pre-primary because it's only been accessed, not in terms of quality or any kind of outcome. But is there a way to better look at how we can get countries to understand that they are doing a lot of, so a lot of the open working group representation don't actually even have a good idea of what's going on in their countries for ECD. We realize, because if you look at the list of countries, there's actually a ton of ECD work, policy, investment, evidence in some of those countries, but it's not being reflected in the documentation that we see. So what we've been doing is trying to distill the messaging down into 9 or 10 sound bites. What do we want the member states to do, and what are the next stages of advocacy? Because now the priority areas have been determined. David Anthony was saying at lunch, I talked to him, and likely they will be distilled down into 12 areas, not 19, because there's no way to have 19 global goals, so maybe 12 global goals. And so from now until August, those member states will be developing goals, targets, and indicators. And I think sometime this week there will be a definition around what do they mean by a goal, target, and indicator, which may be a little bit different than how they were defined in the last agenda. I put on the PowerPoint some of the, how do we, if you don't have a lot of time, how do you advocate to someone who you really want to make sure that they understand where their entry points are for ECD? So what is the ask? What is the rationale? Where is the evidence? What is the obligation? Right? Ziba will talk about the status of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Omnibus Resolution. What is the solution? What are the returns? And what do we want member states to do? And a lot of the discussion has been around universality. What kind of goal could it, it has to be simple, compelling, solves a critical issue, is a voice of the people, and is measurable. And if you went to the session before under the My World survey, the global survey that's looking at consultation from the public around what the priority areas should be, children are not even actually really on the agenda. If you do a search for children, it's not seen as a priority because it's not part of that list of, I think she said it's 18. Let me just look here. And so some of the things, so as I said, you know, it's to figure out how do we better position. And when I met with the UNICEF guy at lunch, I said, you know, how do we decide, you know, where we would see success? What would you see success? I mean, he's from UNICEF. They've got a small ECD team, as you said. ECD is not, it's not that it's not a priority. It's just it is a cross-cutting, it's seen as a cross-cutting issue. So like gender, like disabilities, like protection, it is working with health and with education to look and see how to better leverage. And so for us, we're not sure what the next 4 months will hold. We need to get champions. So we're looking at 3 or 4 countries that will come out and say, yes, we need ECD to be more front and center on the agenda, not necessarily as a global goal, but that children and young children are seen as essential, and we actually see it in the dialogue and in the language. And see what happens in September. It's not, I think what will happen is it'll be the next, from September maybe on to February, March, and that's when they'll be deciding how to agree on what that global framework would look like. So, we know we can go for questions. I can explain a little bit more, but that's sort of the general state of the land around the post-2015. And in terms of, you know, how do you monitor this? Because again, it is likely that only things that can be measured are going to get as part of the global goals and the targets and the indicators. And so, you know, the early childhood field has a lot of experience around evidence, around measurement, around building. But I think one very good example has been how to monitor the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And Ziba's going to talk a little bit about, I think it was a 5-year process? 6-year process around helping state parties monitor child rights in early childhood. So I'm going to pass it over to Ziba.
So I'm going to start by giving some background on where did we come, how did we arrive at the point that we as in group of international expert team under the auspices of United Nations Committee on the Right of the Child decided that we need to sit down and create a monitoring tool to understand how the nations of the world who have ratified the convention are keeping up their obligations under the CRC to children. The real root of the issue started, it was 2 parallel situations going in 2 different United Nations agencies. So I'm going to talk a little bit about World Health Organization's Commission on the Social Determinant of Health, which was happening in mid-2000s. And then from there to Convention on the Right of the Child, and around the same time in the Committee on the Rights of the Child, some issues were happening, and how those 2 connected to each other and led to development of the tool, which we call it the Early Childhood Rights Indicators. And then how did we pilot and what's the status of the tool today? ECRI is the abbreviation we use for Early Childhood Rights Indicators. So by 2000s, during the last few decades of the last century, there were quite compelling evidence building up, talking about a horrendous health inequity seen amongst and within nations. Evidence like this was alarming, but was common. 5 children born in Burundi, Pierre lives to be 1, Liz lives to be 36, Jean lives to be 57, and 72, Sarah 84. And then at the same time of the event, 5 children born in Sweden, Père lives to be 63, Lisa 77, Jan 84, Anton 88, Sarah 93. That brings the life expectancy of people born in Sweden to 81, versus those born in Burundi 250. Quite difference, gross inequity. So this was, as you can see, children born, while in Sweden, seeing a 7 decade of life is a normal thing. In Burundi, only 2 out of 5, excuse me, age to see their 7 decade. And while dying young in Sweden means dying in your 7th decade of life, this gentleman, dying young in Burundi means not seeing beyond first birthday. And this is man-made, really. This is not, the nature did not mean this. This is made and created because of the differences in opportunities, differences in environments people live, and the components of that environment. And we didn't need to look too far to understand where is this, or at least what is the part of explanation for this. If we put the income per capita on x-axis and life expectancy in y-axis, we can see that Burundi with 50 years life expectancy falls in the extreme low part of that spectrum, and Sweden with 81 at the extreme high spectrum. So no doubt income has a big saying in determining health outcome for people. At that time, World Health Organization declared that social determinants of health are responsible for almost half of the variation in health outcome of population. And to address these health inequities and to look for ways to attenuate it, if not eliminate it totally, the World Health Organization set up Commission on Social Determinants of Health, and 9 centers. Sir Michael Mormet of UK was designated as the commissioner. He set up 9 knowledge networks depending on their expertise and experiences from different countries of the world, each center with expertise to investigate one social determinant of health. And our center at UBC, called that Human Early Learning Partnership, we were designated as World Health Organization's Knowledge Network for Early Child Development. So between 2005 and 2007, we took extensive research, extensive research, environmental scan across the world, looking at what policies work, what programs work, what doesn't work, and then we put the result of this in a report to the commissioner, and the report commissioner was published in August of 2008. Our chapter in it was Chapter 5, Equity from the Start. Everybody, all the 9 centers in this book tried to make recommendations on how we can use their respective social determinant of health to as an entry point to enhance the population health, but also to decrease the health inequity and make health a more equitable commodity. So the overarching 3 recommendations of Commissioner was that if we want to overcome this huge health inequity, 3 basic recommendations. We need to improve daily living conditions, including the circumstances in which people are born, grew, live, work, and age. We need to measure and understand the problem and assess the impact of action. And we need to tackle the inequitable distribution of power, money, and resources. And of course, the recommendation number 1 was very relevant to what we do, what our agency does. So Commissioner also declared ECD as the most potent social determinant of health, something that really can equalize all the inequities that lead to health inequity if they are addressed, if we take care of the early years, if we really take advantage of this golden opportunity, golden window of opportunity, and set the tone of the life right. So, and if we don't do that, this is what happens. The ramifications of not attending early years. In the 2nd decade, it appears as school failure, teen pregnancy, criminality. 3rd and 4th decade, it appears as obesity, elevated blood pressure, depression. 5th and 6th decade as coronary heart disease, diabetes, and finally as premature aging and memory loss. And we can find root of all of these during the early years. in the chapter, we presented a ECD framework. How can we use ECD as an entry point to enhance population health and decrease health inequity? In order to do that, we have to work within this framework. We call this Total Environment Assessment Model of ECD, or Team ECD. WHO has adapted this now, and this is partially from Brown-Fernberner and other ecological models. Basically what it does, what it says is that we put the biology of child in the middle, whatever genetic endowment and the conditions he or she is born with. So we have to attend that factor, but also we have to pay attention to layers and layers and layers of environments about children, around children, because development is a biosocial process. It's the net outcome of biology of child plus the experience of child within these environment. The better the experience, quality of experience of children within these environment, the better is the developmental outcome for children. So if we want to raise the developmental outcome, we have to invest in the most proximal environment, which is the family. We have to make sure maternal education is taken care of, paternal child, father's time with child is in place, employment, substance abuse, all the issues in the family that can affect child. Then residential area, child right to play, health and rest, safety and security of neighborhood, region, nation, what kind of policies are in place, the maternity policy. Most of the policies affecting family comes from this level, and then global environment. We also need to take care of relational community. Children often, especially in countries like Canada, children belong to children coming from ethnic background usually have associations with their home culture and attend groups, church, mosque, synagogue. Those environments also have a saying in the final developmental outcome of children. So we need to pay attention to those environment. And last but not least, the environment of ECD programs, the quality of ECD programs, the ratio of adult to child, credentials of professionals, safety of building, et cetera, et cetera. We recommended in our own specific chapter that there is a need definitely for monitoring ECD-related processes and outcome. It's not just invest, invest, invest. We need to pause every now and then and see what's happening, how is this investment working or not working, and as the outcome, as the impact of ECD often goes beyond the borders, so should be our efforts. We need to come together, make global alliances, and attend the issues of ECD. So while this was happening, in the other side of United Nations, in United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child, which is the monitoring body of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, some other issues were happening. In order to explain those issues, I'm just going to introduce Convention. If it's rudimentary for many of you, my apologies. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. So a little background on the Convention. The Convention was adopted by the General Assembly in 20th of November of 1989, and soon after received an unprecedented welcome from the world. By 2011, large majority of the world had ratified that. Today we have 193. Every member of UN except 3 members have ratified that. So that puts a great deal of political will and political power behind this convention, more than any other treaty. The convention is, in a way, the blueprint of Team ECD. Convention, in a way, 25 years ago, very cleverly outlines all these environments in the form of articles that puts obligation on different duty barriers to take care of these environment, to make sure these environment are conducive to better ECD. For instance, starting from individual child, we have many articles talking about children's right to health and survivor. And then when we go to environment of family, Article 7 clearly gives the obligation of government, puts the obligation of supporting families with young children to the government. Then under residential area, Article 31 declares child right to leisure, play, and culture, and with that comes safe and secure environment for them to play in. Under relational community, Article 30 declares rights of minorities and indigenous children to have and to learn about their practices and their heritages and belief system. Under Article 29, right to proper and high quality ECD programs are declared for child. Under many articles, government's obligation at the national level are outlined. Article 32 outlines responsibility of government to protect children against child labor. Article 33, protection against drug abuse. Article 34, against sexual exploitation. Article 35, against abduction, sale, and trafficking. And finally, Article 43 to 54, series of articles outlines responsibilities of government to work with international agencies such as UNICEF to make sure these rights are respected, protected, and implemented. And every child gets a fair share of his or her right. So as you can see, almost quarter of a decade ago, this beautiful blueprint was created for us, and all of the nations signed and ratified to it. And what happened is that from there are two, how do we safeguard this international treaty? Two monitoring processes. One is a monitoring body, which is the Committee on the Rights of the Child, and the second one is a monitoring process. The monitoring process, it goes like this. After ratification, the country writes a report. First, 2 years after ratification, then every 5 years. It's called periodical report. And then the report submitted to committee in Geneva. The Geneva committee sits in a pre-session working group and makes the initial review. Then sends a set of outstanding issue back to the committee. Back to the country, excuse me. The country studies the list of outstanding issues and writes and defend to them and sets up a team to go to Geneva to defend those issues, respond. This team going to Geneva sits with committee in a dialogue called constructive dialogue and discusses these issues. Then the result of constructive dialogue and the initial review and another review becomes concluding observation. A thick resource document generated from Geneva for country, which is meant to serve as a implementation guide or resource guide to how do we move forward. The document concluding observation recognizes the progress made and highlights the gaps, existing gaps, and makes suggestions on how to go about to fill those gaps. So this is the process, and it's less than perfect, but it's been working for 25 years. There are some issues with that. From 1989, that the convention was introduced to us, but 2002, the committee had reviewed tens of reports and had come to an alarming observation that despite the fact that Article 1 of Convention declares child as any individual below the age of 18 unless under laws applicable to that child, age of majority arrives earlier. This is the declaration of child. But most of the reports coming are focusing on older children, and the younger children are overlooked. This was alarming for many reasons. On top of that this was pure discrimination, and it was hitting the convention right at the heart of it. Discrimination is a main principle that non-discrimination is a main principle that convention sits on it. So the committee took a day of discussion and discussed the issue, how can we implement CRC for young children? And the result of that day of discussion became another resource document called General Comment Number 7, Implementing Child Rights in Early Years. A few years passed, and yet there wasn't much difference. So in 2005, a group of us approached the committee and said, okay, this is a great document, done in all good intention, but remains unpractical. It is theoretical, and we just know how to create a better version of it. Let us operationalize it. And the committee took a day of deliberation, a year of deliberation. The next year, committee wrote to us and asked the Human Early Learning Partnership to act as a secretariat and put an ad hoc group together, start working on it. So we put an ad hoc group. The group looks like that. The Human Early Learning Partnership is the secretariat, and there are a number of UN agencies. There are a number of ECD agencies with ECD mandate. The Consultative group is this, the agency that Louise is the director of. International Child Center in Ankara, SOS in Geneva, and then some donors, Aga Khan and Bernard Valnier. Back in those days, we called it UNCRC General Comment 7 Indicators Group. So since 2006, we started working on this. And by 2008, we made a draft of indicators and presented in May 2008, we presented this slide, and I went to Geneva and presented. There was Yang He-Lee's time, and the committee was very pleased with the outcome of the indicators. The indicators are basically comprised of 17 indicators. The tool, which today we know as ECRI, comprised of 17 indicators addressing 17 rights relevant to early years, from right to birth registration to right to breastfeeding, right to protection against child violence, right to play, etc., etc. All these 17 indicators have the same structure. They are basically a whole bunch of questions that we ask from governments. Have you done this? Have you done that? Do you have this? The questions come under 3 categories of question. First category is structural question, asking about policies and laws. Second category, process-oriented questions, asking about initiatives, programs, budgetary allocation. And then finally, outcome. What has been the result of these structure and processes in place on the lives of children? What difference have we made for children, really? Structure as an indication of commitment of the nation to that right. Process is working towards implementing, and then outcome is the difference we make in the environment of that right or in the lives of children. So I'm going to give you an example indicator. I think it is, so the color-coded blue means policy or structural questions, yellow means process-oriented, and then orange means outcome-oriented. I think this is right to protection against violence. Example of policy structure question will be, are there measures in place to assure adequate data collection to monitor the progress in child protection? If the answer of this yes is yes, the respondent has to document what policy, who was responsible to create that, what year implemented, and upload documents to support that yes. And then process questions, are there initiatives to raise awareness on impact of violence on children? Similarly, if yes, document and move, and after numbers and numbers of process questions, we arrive at outcome question. Example of outcome question is, has there been reduction in the last 5 years in the number of occurrence of any form of violence? And anytime the answer is no, the software produces some suggestions. If there is no initiative to raise awareness, examples are positive parenting education, or in-service training of professionals, or public education through media. In 2009, I think I had a practicum student who spent 4 or 5 months just search different countries for example of these best practices. We have made conscious effort to put these examples from developing world, but when we don't have example, we put developed countries example. So the countries who have that part identified as gap in capacity, they don't have to start from scratch. They can see what other countries have done and model them. For example, if we want to know what is in the world in terms of positive parenting education, We give Nobody's Perfect Parenting Program of Canada, but now in the another student of mine nowadays is busy updating these again because 4 or 5 years has passed, and now we are putting Nada es Perfecto, the same program in Chile, so to see that how countries other than Canada can do it, because the thought is that if developing countries can do, if we give an example of developing countries, then anybody else can model that. So this is the tool in a nutshell. In 2008, when we presented this in Geneva, soon after Yang Lee, who was the chair at that time, sent this letter expressing continued support of the committee of this project and encouraging us to pilot these so that we can see, is this one size fits all, or do we want to create, depending on the level of development of nations, separate tool for each set of countries. So with this encouragement letter, we went to Tanzania as a low-income country as our first pilot. Tanzania project was done with hard copy of indicators. It had great deal of challenges. I remember in my last travel from Dar es Salaam, I was traveling with my boss, who is passed away, may God keep him in his heaven, in a bus, very, very difficult travel from Kilimanjaro to Dar es Salaam, and all the dust and all the shaky walls. So we were trying to make the best out of the trip. And I said to Clyde, did you notice that in Dar es Salaam, every ministry office had computer in it? And then he said yes. And he was very, very uncomfortable with this road travel. It was very difficult. And then I said, are you thinking what I'm thinking, Clyde? And he said, right now, all I'm thinking is to get my hotel room and have a shower. And I was really thinking, now we can digitalize it. We can make it computerized. So anyway, we talked about it later, and after that, next 2 years, this was the center of my desk. I had computerizing this tool as running my life. In morning, night, I remember I had a pad in my bedside. I would wake up in the middle of night with some idea. We have to put this feature there. We have to put. So fortunately, after all that hard work, we did manage to create the online version. This is the online version. Similar to the hard copy, we have general chapters on explaining general comment. This is the mother document this came from. What is general comment? Indicators tool for action. Why did we operationalize it? UNCRC's forward, a forward that Yang Lee wrote for us very initially to encourage us to go with this. And what is UNCRC and who are we? The whole name and members of the team. And then down here, you can see all the indicators. Those days were 15 now, because few of them were two-part. Now we have split them. They are 17 actually. And we go from, this is a get ready page, how to get ready before we start. Explains what does no answer mean, what does yes answer mean, what does partial yes mean, and gives other whole sorts of other instruction. And then each indicator has a text that explains why is this right important and why is it, what's the significance of this right in child development. And then at the end of that text, we have a part that says indicators, questions, and when we click on that, all these pages are public, but this is privilege, access privilege, in order to protect the tool. This needs access privilege. There is an email on the site that interested people write to me explaining why do they want to have access to it, who are they, and then we give them access code to access it. So when we press on that, the questions come. Similar to what I showed, this is right to birth registration. These are all blue questions, policy questions. And if we answer yes, if the answer is no, box opens with suggestions. If partial, 2 box opens so the respondent can write whatever they write. These accepts are fulfilled, these accepts are, these aspects are not fulfilled. And if the answer is yes, what is the name of policy or program? They have to write. Who was the person behind that? Who was the institute behind that? And then upload. For every question, we have made it feasible to upload 10 to 15 large documents. A response, yes response without supporting document does not count. We have to have enough evidence to really justify that yes is a true yes. And then at the end of all the structure questions, the software generates a summary. At the end of all process questions, the software generates summary based on response, same after outcome questions. And at the end of all the question 3 sets, there is one major summary. And at the very end, we have 17 of these summaries, and then software generates one grand summary out of all these summaries, and then they click the button and they submit that. Then shortly after, we clone this tool to its Spanish version. We created a Spanish version, the same exact sister tool, and then with this Spanish version, we went to Chile. Chile pilot was much more successful for many reasons. On top of that, the computerized version made it easier. Chile is a very child-friendly government, and lots of capacities were captured. This is a feature of the tool that I'm particularly proud of. This, we call it heat map. After all the questions are responded, the software generates this. So these are the indicators. Yes answer is coded as green, partial as yellow, no is red. So each one of these, so for instance, here there are 3 answers, yellow and 2 green. So 1 partial, 2 green. These are structural questions, respond to structural questions, responses to process, and then responses to outcome. So as you can see, this puts all that complex information in 1-page summary. But in order to avoid oversimplifying the complex issues there, if a person is curious to see, okay, what are all these reds here, they click on it, and the software takes them back to the original question to understand why are there so many red in under process question of indicator 9A. So this is like a middle income country. You can see it's predominantly green. That shows really the existence of capacity. And let's see this, a low income country. So green, red. But this is not the point of the use of this tool. The committee does not like us to compare countries to another. This is what we like to see. We like to see a reference, to set a reference point in 2012 for this low-income country, and then hopefully see this happening. They see the number of reds, and then we go to 17, and then we go to 22. This is what is the point of this tool. And so Ready Community, really, what is in a nutshell is that this tool, also the convention, the message in it is this simply: ready families, ready services, ready community, protected environment, nurturance in the environment. It's all of them that will give rise to enhanced health and development outcome for children. It's not just biology of child, it's not just availability of health services, and it's whole host of social determinants around child that plays that right. What is the cost of not investing? This is an example of one region of the world, a very affluent region of the world. At grade 4, 75% of children unable to read at the grade level. At grade 10, that number increases to 82%. And then 32% of children do not graduate. And to fix this, the answer is neither one of these. Fixing this starts here, as we all know. And this is really trajectory of failure. And what happens if we look at the level of investment of that region in children, you see for every child at preschool, they invest 2,300, at school 7,000, at high school about 10,000. And the money they don't invest, the money that should be invested here, and they don't invest, drains out of the system in the form of remedial action. This state spends 51,000 for every incarcerated children. So just a fraction of that would have changed the entire scenario drastically. Uses of ECRI, this tool is an inventory aside from a tool to monitor the child rights status in a country. It is simply a tool to take inventory of capacities around ECD. How many yeses are in the system, how many nos. Then it can be a tool for advocacy. How can, using the identified nos and drawing the attention of politicians and policymakers on that gap, on those gaps. And then can be a planning and capacity building tool. How can we turn those no's to yeses? And I finish with this beautiful world of Mahatma Gandhi. If we are to reach real peace in the world, and if we are to carry a real war against war, we shall have to begin with the children. Thank you. So, how am I doing in terms of...
Okay, good. No, thanks. Thanks, Ziba. That's great. I actually wondered whether or not you could speak to, you know, what's happening with the tool in terms of how countries are reporting. Are they using it in their reporting? And yeah, are they? What's the next step in terms of the committee using that to inform countries about it?
Yeah. So this is a good question. Yeah. In 2012, September 2012, Canada's report was reviewed in the committee, and that was the first time that committee put in the concluding observation encouraging the use of existing indicators to monitor child rights in early years. Beyond that, it hasn't been publicized for countries to use, but what is in the agenda for us, hopefully, to aim for is eventually to do it in enough number of countries to figure our way around that then we ask committee to give it a global deployment, to announce this as a report writing tool when countries want to write their report, just the ECD part of their report, not the whole spectrum.
That's good. Actually, Canada has yet to respond to the concluding observations on what they're supposed to be doing. So they're very naughty, those the Stephen Harper government. Anyway, so I hope that's given you an idea around sort of where we're at in terms of post-2015.